Visiting a city for the first time and not sure what to do? A walking tour is a great place to start. Top Dog Tours is in Boston, Toronto, Philadelphia, and New York City. To book a walking tour, you can visit us at topdogtours.com and be sure to check out our social media accounts for offers and discounts. Hi, this is Nicole Kelly, and this is She Brew in the City, and today we are talking with Rabbi Juliana Karol. How are you today?
I'm very excited to be here, and you can call me Julie. I'm really casual.
Okay, we like casual. So, Julie, I usually start by asking my guests what their Jewish upbringing was like, where they're from, what denomination they grew up with, whether or not you were bar or bat mitzvahed. So, if you could shed some light on that.
I grew up in Scarsdale, New York, just north of where we are in Upper West Side. And I grew up Reform. I grew up at Westchester Reform Temple. It was founded in the 1950s, and my mom joined with her parents very soon after it was established, maybe 5 years after it was established. I'm actually at least a fourth-generation Reform Jew because my grandfather was raised Reform back in Berlin before fleeing the Nazis.
Wow.
So Reform Judaism has been the only Judaism in all of the generations of my family that were ever alive as far as I knew it. And I shared a B'nai Mitzvah with my twin brother David in Parshat Vayigash. So yeah, Reform is all I've ever really known. And it wasn't until I got to college that I really found out there's other kinds of Judaism.
It's interesting that you say that you're descendant of Reform Jews. I think a lot of people don't realize how old the Reform movement is, or older than a lot of even Orthodox sects as well.
Oh, that I mean, I don't know. I can't speak with any expertise about kind of how old Orthodox sects are, but I think it's a profound point to say that much of what we see in Orthodoxy today is an outgrowth of World War II and a response to World War II and a desire to live the most rigorous form of Judaism as a way of honoring the legacy of those who died and honoring God and trying to understand covenantal Judaism. But yes, Reform Judaism existed way before even the First World War. It was part of the Jewish Enlightenment that really began at the end of the 19th century. And so it's been around for quite a while. And it was an attempt really to reconcile the traditional understanding and belief of Torah Judaism, of halakha, and really rigorous understanding of the law with everything we were learning about with modernity and industrialization and trying to figure out how to embed oneself in society and to succeed in that society while also maintaining an authentic commitment to Judaism. And so that's one of the reasons we're so proud to be Reform here at Rodef Sholem and just in any community that's Reform is that it's a real embrace of preserving tradition while also understanding that the world changes and people change with the world. And so we bring our tradition with us.
I love that. That's so beautiful. I feel like I don't know if I could succinctly say it like that, but that's my now explanation, I guess, about why I like Reform Judaism. I did not grow up with any female representation in the clergy at my synagogue at all. I grew up conservative, so it was very, very, very different. Was this something that you grew up with? Was it something you found later in life? Was there a female representation in the clergy at your synagogue?
There was Rabbi Beth Singer, who's out in the world, actually just retired from a pulpit with her husband out in San Francisco. She was a rabbi at my synagogue from when I was born. I think she participated in my baby. Oh no, Rabbi Debbie Zecker participated in my baby naming. She preceded Rabbi Beth Singer. So yes, there have been female rabbis, but Rabbi Debbie Zecker is actually one of the first 50 women that was ordained in history of Judaism. And she was actually a rabbi at my synagogue growing up. And so I always saw women as potential clergy. I never thought as a child that a clergy person was a normal job. So I never considered becoming a clergy person. When I went to college, I was aspiring to be a diplomat. I wanted to study languages. I wanted to travel the world. I wanted to be an ambassador for the country. And it was only through studying Hebrew and then Jewish history that I started on hearing my calling and started on a discernment path to actually being a rabbi now. But it wasn't the issue of whether a woman could be a rabbi. It was like if a normal person could be a rabbi. And I did not think normal people became clergy. I thought only like special, unusual, godly people became clergy. And I was just a regular kid. So I didn't really make that connection at all as a child. But female leadership was certainly present in my understanding of Judaism.
It's kind of like how kids freak out when they see their school teacher in the real world. It's
yes.
like they exist in another plane.
That's
that is
right.
Not
you go
your
to the
classroom.
supermarket? What? I thought
I know.
you lived at school.
It's kind of the same thing. kind of going back to what you were talking about before, was there a specific moment you decided to become a rabbi, or was it something that gradually happened as you learned, more through your degrees in college?
Definitely the latter. It was a gradual. First, it was that I was at NYU, and NYU's campus is also shared with Hebrew Union College's campus. And Hebrew Union College, the Reform Seminary, runs a soup kitchen every Monday. And when I was a sophomore in college, I started volunteering at that soup kitchen, and all of the students who lead it are aspiring cantors and rabbis. And I was studying Hebrew and taking some Jewish history courses at the time. And we were studying the same things. They were studying it at a more advanced level, but it suddenly kind of clicked to me that their jobs and their whole lives were going to be continuing to study and doing work like soup kitchens. And that was kind of amazing to me, that you could make a life around being of service to your community, studying Judaism, and then teaching and conveying that learning toward a community. So that's when I first thought, oh, maybe this isn't as unusual of a job as I imagined. I always kind of imagined it like being a priest, actually, because I grew up around a lot of Christians too, and I imagined it as kind of like a cloistered ivory tower type of job.
I think a lot of us do.
Right?
Like it's very, you literally stand above the congregation.
Exactly.
It's very other, and I completely get what you're saying.
So the soup kitchen it broke that kind of barrier down of, oh, these are normal people. They're a little bit older than me, but like, they're kids. I mean, they're in their 20s and they're funny and they have wicked senses of humor and they're good and they share my interests. So that's really where I first started thinking about it. But my understanding of being a clergy person was always that if you were going to be a clergy person, you'd have to spend your entire life being extremely well behaved because you're representing a community.
Yeah,
and this isn't to say I was such a rebel. I was not such a rebel. I'm a pretty goody two-shoes type of person. But I knew that I would be representing Jewish community, and I knew the gravitas of that kind of commitment. And I didn't know if I wanted to, have to behave all the time and, never get angry in the supermarket when I'm impatient on the checkout line, or, always walk through the street without having my phone in my hand because I want to be able to greet people. I mean, those were things I was thinking about already, that you become a public person. And I never wanted to be in a position to do anything that would denigrate Judaism publicly. So that felt like a really big responsibility. So I went to graduate school. I actually took a master's degree in Jewish history. And then I worked. I worked at the Memorial de la Shoah in Paris. I did an internship during grad school at the Holocaust Museum. I spent 2 years at the Religious Action Center in Washington, D.C. And during that period, Obama had been inaugurated. It was 2009 when I started that job.
Very exciting time.
And so I thought, oh my gosh, maybe I just never thought about politics. Maybe I'll do politics. And so I spent those 2 years actually thinking Judaism, politics, like what's more of a powerful call? And it was so clear that it was Judaism. So that's what we call my discernment period. And then from there, I had another job that I took on the way to becoming a rabbi. And then I went to rabbinical school. So it was a journey for sure.
I love that you talk about the responsibility that clergy members have. But I think now, even just now with everything going on, being a Jew and identifying as a Jew, there's a responsibility to that. And I think also being a Jewish mother, showing your children what it means to be a Jew. And one of the things I love about Reform Judaism is the idea of tikkun olam and giving back to the community, and that Rodef Shalom is so active with that, because I grew up, my mother was very active with preschool and my schools and, volunteering for things and donating money. So I think that's something I definitely want to pass on to our daughter. But I love that Reform Judaism is such a big part of that as well. And that I love that's kind of was the segue into you becoming a rabbi, was the idea of healing the community.
That a job could be in service to others. And I think one of the benefits of being more of an assimilated Judaism is that you really feel a sense of obligation in the broader community in which you're a part. We're always thinking about how we can show up and serve our Jewish community and the members of our community. But our responsibility and our sense of obligation certainly doesn't end there. It expands to, all the people that we share this community with, that we share this world with, to the best that we can. And we're very conscious of that. So that was my doorway in.
I think that's so important, especially in New York, when there's so many different people with socioeconomic situations, and we literally see people begging on the streets and, providing help in the way we can. So can you walk me through the process of what becoming an ordained rabbi means within the Reform sect? I know it's different within the different sects of Judaism, but from your personal experience, I know that you have to spend time in Israel. Do you have to get a master's degree? How does that work? Does it help having a degree, undergraduate degree in Judaism? Is there an interview process? So if you could walk me through,
Sure.
Let's say, I decided, tomorrow I want to be a rabbi. What would be my first steps with that?
Okay. If you decide tomorrow you want to be a rabbi, which would be fabulous, you would be so strengthened by your wisdom and leadership.
That would be a very fast decision.
And I would write you a recommendation.
Oh, that's nice.
So in order to get into Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, which is the Reform seminary, you have to have a bachelor's degree. So first we'd have to confirm that you have a bachelor's degree. Do you have a bachelor's?
I'm actually going to be finishing that up.
Amazing.
Soon. So let's pretend this is a few months.
Okay. So
down
in
the
a
line.
few months, you are now eligible to apply. So what are they looking for? They're looking for, when you apply, if you're 22 and have just graduated, they're looking for a real demonstrated interest in Judaism. So having a major, having worked at a summer camp, those things are going to be really important if you haven't worked, because you're going to be ordained really young.
Yeah.
And there are going to be certain skills that you can only learn on the job: pastoral care, teaching. There are certain things that you really can only, rabbiing is a growth job. Everybody their best day is probably their last day, because you can only get better with each day, since it's basically being a professional human with human beings and walking the journey of life with them. So the younger you are, the more it actually is really valuable to have a kind of a very clear and demonstrated commitment to Judaism, and having shown that you have a lot of experience in different Jewish places of work. They actually prefer for you to wait, because the idea is that you're going to be, the second you're ordained, you're a rabbi to everybody from age 0 to the end of life.
Than you, yeah.
And so there's a lot that you need to know. And so having had a job and having had any kind of professional experience, that is so important, because that's being a professional human. You're interacting, you understand hierarchies, you understand how to meet deadlines, you understand how to multitask. And if you haven't had a job before, you're kind of staying in the academic sphere for a really long time. And there's kind of a hope that a little bit of job experience will ease the transition into actual working life in the rabbinate. So then there's actually, I think, a little bit more flexibility on what you did. So for instance, if you come from a theater background and you show this kind of a whole other life and demonstrated passion, but now you realize you have a calling to serve and you really want to go back to rabbinical school, they're actually going to really want to hear from you in that application what's driving this now. But they're going to see that entire career that you had as a huge asset to the rabbinate, because you bring all that knowledge in with you as life experience and as Torah. What's Torah? It's wisdom. So you're going to have all of that already in you. The school doesn't have to give you any of that. And so that's also super valuable. So that's why applying to rabbinical school is very individualistic. They're really looking at each person in their entirety. They're looking at the Torah of that human being, and they're assessing, is this person ready? Does this person need a couple of years to work? And is this person getting into this work for healthy reasons? We all have to take kind of a psychological profiling test to make sure that we're going to be safe in this work, because it comes with a lot of power. There's a lot of intimacy in pastoring to people, and there's a lot of power with having a pulpit and having people listen to you and guiding a community. And we have to be responsible about who we ordain with that power. So that is kind of one of the practical aspects of the application process, is meeting with a psychologist and doing an exam and just making sure we're all healthy and planning to do this work with the right intentions. You do a full application process. You have to take a Hebrew exam so that there's some competency, because the first year is in Jerusalem. And the reason for that is manifold. The reasons are manifold, but a few of them are because people have to be able to grapple with their relationship to the state of Israel and what that means. They also need to have like a good basic level of fluency with Hebrew, because so much of Jewish text is in Hebrew, and it's just important to be able to make use of all of the rich text that exists in our tradition. So much of the Jewish conversation that exists before the last 100 years is in Hebrew.
Yeah.
So that's another piece of it as well. And it also really helps this community of learners coalesce together. So that first year is in Jerusalem if you're admitted, and then it's another 4 years. It used to be at either a campus in Los Angeles, Cincinnati, New York, or you could stay in Israel. But the Cincinnati campus, due to some of the financial pressures of maintaining a big campus for not that many students, they've actually decided to just conclude their rabbinical program there. They're still offering some graduate degree courses, and they have the American Jewish Archive, which is an incredible resource.
What's that?
It's this vast library of Jewish resources that in particular are related to the Reform movement, but also just Judaism writ large. It's one of the best Jewish libraries, maybe in the world, but certainly in the country. And the librarian and the chief curator of that is a man named Gary Zola, who has been leading this institution for decades. And it's really a gem of Reform Judaism. And it's in Cincinnati, which is where Reform Judaism was founded in the United States.
Yeah, I knew that.
So anytime somebody converts, we send a certificate of their conversion to the American Jewish Archive because that's where the records are kept about all of Judaism. A lot of people donate their sermons or the bodies of their work to the American Jewish Archive so that research can be done, so that, again, we honor the history that this movement is creating and contributing to the canon of Jewish history.
That's good to know. I think one of the things I'm planning on doing when I finish my bachelor's is get a degree in Jewish history in some aspects, so that I'm sure I'll end up there at some point.
Well, there's a lot of places you can do that, but the American Jewish Archive will be a great resource. So then it would be 4 years on any one of those campuses. So it's a 5-year program. And after that 5 years, by the 4th year, you earn a master's degree. So you don't need a graduate degree to enter the program, but it's certainly helpful because I placed out of some of the core requirements and was able to take more electives, which was fun for me. We are also in consortium with some of the other universities. So I was able to study at NYU in their graduate program and get credit for those courses if it wasn't being offered in my school. So the 4th year, you get a Master of Hebrew Letters, which is that one.
Ooh, fancy degrees on the wall.
And then there's smicha, which is the bigger one that you get after 5 years. Some people take 6 if they add on a degree or if they slow down their course load a little bit. Some people are working all the time. And then part of getting that ordination is doing internships at synagogue so that you really get a lot of practical experience alongside your more theoretical studies. And ordination actually involves what's the laying of hands. So a rabbi in the community actually places their hands on your head and they give you a blessing. And as you receive that, those hands are really proxies for all of Am Yisrael, kind of empowering me as a leader. And that moment is a moment of kind of transferring trust and transferring responsibility and covenantal relationship. And so that's kind of what all of those years of, am I worthy? Am I going to be responsible? Am I going to do well by this and help lift up the name and the reputation of Judaism for all who come in contact with me as a rabbi? Is that going to be my role? That moment of ordination is what imbues me with those privileges, but then it also imbues me with all those responsibilities.
Did you find that most of your fellow classmates were a little more experienced and older, or there were younger people, or what was kind of the ratio of ages?
Typically in a class, there's normally at least one person in their second career who raises the age a little bit, somebody who comes back in their 40s and 50s. In our class, there were a bunch of us who started in our mid to late 20s. So we had work experience and we all kind of coalesced because we were on the older side from some of the people who had just come out of college. So my year on the whole was probably younger on average because we didn't have a real second career person in their 40s and 50s who kind of raised our average age. But there was a social difference between people who were coming straight from college or from 1 year out of college and the people who had chosen to work a little bit. There was definitely a sense of kind of, I think, seniority among those of us who had felt like we'd been out in the real world versus those who were continuing an educational experience. It breaks down over time because it's such a small class and you're really in it together and it's hard. But I think that was really the kind of array. It wasn't such a big age gap. I think like maybe 22 to 32 or something like that.
What was the average class size?
So the rabbis and the cantors are mostly separate. And my class of rabbis was maybe 12 to 14 at any given time.
Speaking of that, what was the drop rate of people deciding that this was something that they were not able to continue with?
When we got to Jerusalem, it was the whole year of entering, but that would be spread over 3 campuses because none of the people who entered with me decided to stay in Israel.
Okay.
And let's say that was 40 people. During that year, 2 people realized, one, that she was 3 people. One person left after a week because she hadn't been out of the United States ever, and it was just too difficult.
It was too difficult, yeah.
So she just went home. Another 2 people did the full year. One transitioned to NYU to do a nonprofit degree and a master's, realized that the rabbinate wasn't really the right calling, but that she wanted to be in the nonprofit sector, and she's having a great career. And then another person went to BU and pursued a PhD. And then later, when we got back to the United States, in the New York campus alone, because that's where mine was, so I kind of lost track of the other 2 campuses, one additional person realized either in her second or third year that she was going to take a different path.
That's a relatively low drop rate, I think, for any advanced degree of any kind.
Yeah, and I think the rigor of the application process is meant to try as best as possible to help people kind of move toward school if it's the right choice for them, or to be an open dialogue with them about why it might not be the right choice.
I love how kind of involved that is. I wish even just regular undergrad was that involved, instead of like, I couldn't vote last week, but now I'm going to take out, $30,000 in loans and go study philosophy. And, just cause I think I feel like people going to college would probably be a little better mentally if there was more thought put in the entire process, instead of just kind of being like, well, I like this college. I think this is what I want to do.
Yeah. I think about that a lot, about the difference between Americans who start college at 18 versus Israelis who often serve first and end up starting college. And I'd be very curious if somebody published a paper about the likelihood for the degree that somebody who starts college at 20 or 21, how much that applies to their future career or how valuable that is, versus somebody who starts at 18 and how much that impacts their life. I would be very curious if somebody explored that and wrote a paper on it.
Is this, as far as entering rabbinical school, kind of like the conversion process where you're discouraged a little bit first to kind of make sure you actually are really interested in this, or are they very supportive?
So I love that you said that, because now you've given me the opportunity to disabuse an idea in Judaism that we discourage conversion, which is not the case. I'm sure that there are sects where that's
so that
possible.
Episode of Sex and the City is not correct?
That episode of Sex and the City is certainly not correct vis-a-vis Reform Judaism. Reform Judaism is embracing of anybody who wants to ally themselves with Jewish community, who wants to take on a Jewish identity, or somebody who feels that they're Jewish and wants to ritually affirm that or enact that. There is absolutely no reason for us to be a barrier to a person claiming a Jewish identity, or to a person allying themselves to a Jewish identity by marrying a Jewish person or by raising Jewish children. I mean, for us, that's just added strength and added blessing to our community. So we always have a conversation with a person just to learn their story and to make sure that our program, which is pretty rigorous, it's a full year long, it's every week, it's an hour and a half, and then you do a separate kind of a one-on-one meeting with a clergy person so that you can process your questions and wrestling as you make your way towards conversion. But that's definitely not the idea that we're supposed to say no 3 times to make sure a person is really authentically committed to conversion is certainly not at all true of Reform Judaism. I will not speak to other facets of Judaism, other denominations, but I will say that the seriousness with which Judaism, or at least Reform Judaism, thinks about identity is consistent between becoming a rabbi and becoming a Jew, which is to say that we're really curious about each person's individual story. The seminary is curious about each person's journey to rabbinical school and really interested in allowing Jewish leaders to lead in ways that are kind of symbiotic with their strengths. So once upon a time, a seminary was really preparing people to become a congregational rabbi. You can be a rabbi now and be an executive director. You could be a hospital chaplain. You could have a podcast. You could do so many things. And the seminary is really trying to adjust itself to see how is it that each one of these incredible people who want to be of service to Am Yisrael, to the Jewish people, how can they bring their strength and be empowered and equipped with tools to help them do that to the best of their ability, and obviously to be able to succeed in getting the best job. So that's really how it's positioning itself, which is a huge change that's been taking place over the last 15, 20 years as more job opportunities exist for rabbis, and as unfortunately synagogues close because not everybody wants to be a member of a synagogue anymore. They do Jewish in a lot of different ways. So you have to be really nimble in thinking about what the job of a rabbi can be. So that's where I see the consistency, that a convert's journey is very individualistic, and it's really about helping to understand with them the path that they're walking towards Judaism, where they're coming from, what parts of their past they're taking with them, and how we're never erasing or rendering unkosher any part of them, but adding Judaism onto that identity and welcoming them into this community, into this tradition. And the same with the rabbinate. You're coming into the rabbinate as the person you always were, and you're taking on all of these new responsibilities and privileges. And I think that's really where I see the parallel between those two.
I love that you talk about not getting rid of your past, especially I think a lot of people who are thinking about conversion or not really sure if becoming a Jew is for them, that they would completely have to forget, their family traditions and, what was important to them or their background.
No, we would never, ever want to say that the way that a person was raised wasn't holy and filled with blessing, and the way that we want to be helpful to people is helping them navigate as they adopt a new identity. So now, what are you going to do when you're celebrating Christmas with your family of origin and you have Jewish children? What's a way that you can talk with your children about the beauty of those traditions, even if those aren't the traditions of the family that you are now raising, and trying to equip them with the tools to be able to do that so that they see the beauty in the variety of traditions and faiths that are out there. We're one. So we're excited about the ways that we can be a source of support for people as they navigate that.
So you mentioned you're a twin. What was it like having a dual b'nai mitzvah? It was very interesting. And there was a girl in my class. She was a year younger than her twin older siblings. So her parents did a threefer.
Whoa.
So because you can, as a female, have your bat mitzvah at 12.
This is true.
And she had an older sister and brother and they were 13. So they did it all together. And I think, my synagogue was much smaller. So you got your own day. It was just about you. And I know a lot of people across the country in larger synagogues, they share with people, they may not even have a relationship with. But what was it like sharing that experience with your brother? Was there like competition about who learned faster or which part of the portion you were going to do, or like fighting over what the theme for the party was going to be? Were there two themes? How did that work out?
So I will say that I grew up in Westchester, so there was definitely nothing unusual about sharing your b'nai mitzvah day. And because I grew up as a twin, there was nothing unusual about sharing anything. So that was totally normal. My brother and I had Parshat Vayigash, which is the Torah portion in Genesis where Joseph reveals himself to his brothers now that he is in this position of power. And
mine was about building the temple and all of the different
Leviticus
measurements.
Oh, man.
So it was really hard for me to write a speech about why this was important to my life as a 13-year-old because it was about building the temple.
Did you have a winter bat mitzvah?
March 13th,
That's
1999.
Right. That's right.
I thought it was very cool that it was my bat mitzvah. It was March 13th.
I mean, you got a difficult parsha, but March 13th
it was the longest one.
13 on the 13th.
Yeah. It worked out.
So we, I think for a minute, maybe had a conversation about who would get to give their Devar Torah, their speech, their teaching about that moment, because that was clearly the cool moment. And I relinquished that moment to my brother.
Oh.
So I let him do that. And I actually have my Devar Torah in my cabinet here. My dad, when I got this job, he had saved a folder of things for my bat mitzvah and he gave them to me. And I have them in my study here because the senior rabbi of my congregation is Rabbi Rick Jacobs. And he is now the president of the Union for Reform Judaism. I actually worked for him before I became a rabbi. And I was supposed to have my bat mitzvah on December 11th, but my parents decided to change it, I think, actually, and Mom and Dad, you'll correct me if you ever listen to this, but I think it's because my brother and I said we want to actually be 13, and our birthday is December 14th. So we switched weekends, did it on December 18th, but our senior rabbi was set to lead the services at Biennial, which is this huge every other year gathering of all of Reform Judaism that used to take place before COVID and no longer happens. It's a huge honor to lead services at that conference because thousands and thousands of people come and they all pray together. So he wrote me a note that I have celebrating my bat mitzvah. The only thing that was, I think, unusual about sharing was that we got to have all of the honors for the aliyot when you get called to the Torah. We didn't have to deal with another family kind of having half the service and being present in a service where you don't really know the other student as well or you don't know their family members. So my sister had to share. And I remember she shared with a lovely family. And I remember my parents having at least one meeting where we actually went to that family's house and we talked about the weekend to make sure that the parties wouldn't conflict and just to make sure that everybody was copacetic on how it was they were making their plans. And it was exactly the way you would hope something like that would unfold. Everybody was so civilized and respectful. So we didn't have to manage that because everything was just our family. So sharing was like a huge privilege, actually, because you didn't have to navigate any of those dynamics. And we were really the last b'nai mitzvah. I went to over 100 b'nai mitzvah because I'm a twin and everybody thought they had to invite both of us. And Scarsdale's a pretty Jewish place. So it was a very, very busy year and a half for us. And we were like the final one. We didn't have a theme because my parents were not those kind of parents.
Okay.
Like our b'nai mitzvah party was in the social hall right behind the synagogue right after. It was a luncheon party. We got the DJ. We had chicken nuggets. The parents had whatever their fancy plated meal was. And what I remember is we had a beautiful cake because a young man in our class, his mother made these very fancy cakes. And it looked like a basket of fruit.
Oh, that's really cool.
All made out
I had a giant pink Torah cake.
Oh, giant
looks
pink
like a
Torah. Can't
Torah.
compete.
Yes.
But she put in, because I was 13, so these were our values, she put in a little basketball in the fruit basket for my brother and a little Tiffany box in the basket for me, because I had to think for Tiffany jewelry as a 7th grader, which of course I think a lot of us did.
Yes.
So that was really, there was no particular theme, but we danced all afternoon. And our giveaway was that gum that is like a foot of pink gum that's all in a circle. I'm trying to remember the name of it, like bazooka or something.
It was like, I know what you're talking about.
It's not fruit by the foot, but it was like gum by the foot.
Yeah.
And that's what we gave people. And people were actually quite pleased with that, just getting some gum.
I mean, who doesn't like gum?
Who doesn't like?
So you talked about this. Prior to joining the clergy, you worked at the Religious Action Center for Reform Judaism, as well as the Union for Reform Judaism. What did you do there? What are those organizations for those of us listening who don't know what that is?
I'm happy to tell you. So the Union for Reform Judaism is actually the organization that unites all of the Reform congregations. And so as of now, there are probably 800 to 900 congregations that actually call themselves Reform. But in order to be part of the Reform movement, you pay dues to the Union for Reform Judaism. And the president of that organization, Rabbi Rick Jacobs, is my childhood rabbi. And that's basically to ensure that as things happen in the world, that there's a voice of Reform Judaism and that you can kind of look to a person to basically speak on behalf of the Reform communities. We obviously don't have a pope. We don't have one person who kind of unequivocally speaks without anybody else. And so, of course, Rabbi Jacobs can say things and people can disagree, but he's been elected and put into that position in order to represent Reform Judaism, not just in the Jewish world and with Israel, but also just kind of in the world writ large, because obviously there's a lot happening and Reform Judaism wants to have a voice. And to that point, when politics are concerned, that's where the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism comes in. It's called the RAC for short. And that's actually the lobbying office for Reform Judaism in Washington, D.C.
Oh, so Reform Judaism has lobbyists.
We have lobbyists. And
also someone you were talking about politics you can do if you're interested in Judaism and politics.
Exactly.
Did not know that.
If you are interested, if you're listening to this podcast and you are in college and thinking about ways to combine your love of Judaism and politics, you can do the Mahon Kaplan summer internship at the RAC, or when you're done, you can apply to the Eisendrath Legislative Assistant Fellowship, which is what I did, and you can work for a year lobbying from a Jewish perspective on all of the different pieces of legislation that we care about. So what's so important about the RAC is that often when religious people go to Capitol Hill, they have an agenda that doesn't align with the religious agenda of the Religious Action Center.
I can only imagine what those things are.
So, for instance, when I go and I lobby on a woman's right to make choices about her body, I'm doing that because my Torah says in Leviticus that the mother's life and the child's life that are in her womb are not separate, that the child is actually part of the woman. And so her life takes precedence. And I'm saying that as a person of faith, I'm arguing that point about reproductive choice and a woman's autonomy. And it's so important because there are a lot of places where we work in coalition with religious people around immigration, around economic justice. But then there are a lot of places where there is not unanimity among people of faith in this country. And so that's where our voices really stick out, is to be able to say, hello, I'm a person of faith. I pray all the time. And the God that I pray to kind of instructs me in my covenantal relationship that this is the way that I want the world to be. This is how I want women to be treated. This is how I want people to get access to medical care. This is the quality of life I think people should have. And a lot of this is rooted in my traditions and my beliefs. Gun control is another great example of that. The reason that it's so easy for us to lobby for real restrictions on gun control is because we privilege life. And that's coming from a religious place.
Yeah.
So that's what the Religious Action Center does. It really works as being the voice of Reform Judaism on Capitol Hill. And so it's very explicitly a political lobbying office. And so that's where I worked from 2009 to 2011. And then when I moved to the Union for Reform Judaism in 2011, I had just applied to rabbinical school. But my childhood rabbi had been elected to the presidency of the Union for Reform Judaism. So I actually went to work for him to help facilitate his transition from my childhood synagogue into his role as the president, basically serving as an administrative assistant. But then I deferred for a year to enter rabbinical school because he had a rollout for a year where he basically heard from congregations about their hopes and what they saw as the challenges of Reform Judaism and what they were hoping the union would do. And so he needed a person to really own the strategy of that piece of his work. And so I worked with him on a year to do that.
That must have been very helpful coming into becoming a rabbi yourself, is firsthand hearing all of the complaints and concerns of the synagogues throughout the country.
It was fascinating because I grew up in the Northeast and had a very particular understanding of Jewish life. I happened to be married to a person, my husband Adam, who grew up in Topeka, Kansas, as the son of the only rabbi in Topeka. So through my marriage, I gained a great exposure to how different it is to grow up Jewish in this country, but also through my job, I got to hear such different voices of clergy. And interestingly, whereas so many of my colleagues who came into rabbinical school had experiences working in synagogues, so knew in depth like the individual culture of one or two synagogues or summer camps. I had never worked in a synagogue really or a summer camp, so I only really knew my temple. But I had this vision of the landscape of Reform Judaism from more of a macro level that I got from my job. So coming to Rhoda Sholem as an intern was really my first opportunity to be a rabbi position, a rabbinic intern in a synagogue and understanding the day-to-day dynamics of the job. Before that, I kind of understood the politics of the movement, but I didn't really see the inner workings until I started school.
You also mentioned you spent time at the Memorial de la Shoah in Paris. I am always interested in how different European countries present Holocaust history and the responsibility they take for what happened. How does France present Holocaust history and their participation in the Holocaust?
So I'm not an expert on France writ large, so I will decline to answer that question. But I will say that the Memorial de la Shoah, which is in the Marais, which is in the 4th arrondissement in Paris, it's actually the place of the first memorial to anybody who died in the Holocaust because it was inaugurated as the war was ending. And I want to trust my memory, but I may be wrong. So feel free to publish this and just say if I'm wrong that the rabbi was wrong and that I'm acknowledging that this isn't a firm point in my head. But something is telling me that the location of where the memorial was established may have been some kind of archive where they were keeping documents related to what was happening during the Holocaust. And I think that that's why that location was chosen. Okay. The actual building of the building happened, I think, in the early 2000s. Oh. So they had a memorial, but the museum, it took a while to actually fundraise and to create. And what's very powerful about this space, because they have a lot of moving exhibitions and then they have a permanent exhibition, is that when you walk into the actual space of the memorial, outside are just stelae of names of Jewish people who were deported.
Yeah.
So interestingly, one of the names on those stels is Mois Amarillo, which is the name of my great-grandfather, who was rounded up in the Vel d'Iv and who was put in the camp that was getting ready to deport people. It was that big stadium that I'm trying to remember. Anyway, my grandmother was a Lutheran German and had connections and was able to get fake papers to actually get him out before the deportation to Auschwitz. But his head had already been shaved and he thought that his life was over. So another Mois Amarillo ended up being deported to Auschwitz and dying. But it was not my great-grandfather who was actually saved by his wife and being able to, have those connections. We're going to touch on that
later because one thing I'm really interested in is Holocaust generational trauma. But we will actually, we can do that now. As a Jew in general, we carry this generational trauma of thousands of years of persecution and possibly trying to hide who we are and trying to figure out keeping one foot in secular society, but also being a Jew. As someone who has roots in Europe during the war, do you think you carry any of that trauma with you, any of that, history?
I certainly carry the history. My family has one of those crazy survival stories. So I think I have to be very careful with using the word trauma since I think so many people in our community are descendants of sole survivors, people whose entire families were wiped out, people who had grandparents who were the only person who survived or who escaped. And that was not my family story. My family story is that my mom's family came over before the war. They were part of the large immigration that came over in the end of the 1800s and the early 1900s. That's my family. So they were economic immigrants. And I'm sure that their journey was difficult, and certainly making their way in this country was very trying, but not traumatic trying, immigration trying. Whereas my dad's parents, Sylvia and Felix, my grandma Sylvia is still alive. She's 97 and lives in the house where she raised my dad.
Wow.
My grandfather Felix, his father was a very successful businessman and knew when Hitler was elected that he would not have a future in Germany. So they left the second that Hitler came to power and were able to take their assets with them and kind of start their lives anew. Whereas my grandmother, who was raised by a Greek Jewish father and a Lutheran German mother, they were a little bit less sensitized to what was going on because they were so embedded in secular society. So she left Dresden in 1936 and was actually held in an internment camp for a while because they were German refugees, and they had, in those days, you kind of bought your passports. So they had passports that weren't really aligned. And so she and her mother actually were held in an internment camp for a few months. And then she ended up surviving the war in France. And for anybody who's familiar with the kind of history of World War II, only quote unquote 25% of French Jews were killed during World War II because they tried to only deport new immigrants to the country because they did believe, or so they say, that French people who were French by birth, that their Judaism was kind of a non-issue. They believed in laïcité, which is this value of secularism. So they weren't going to separate any of their Jewish French countrymen from anybody else. But people who were newer immigrants who came over during the war came over as Jewish refugees. And so it was kind of the sacrifice that was made, or whatever deals they were making with the Wehrmacht in order to be able to kind of endure the war. So I'm not going to kind of render a commentary on an impossible situation that I didn't live through, but the 25% of the people from France who were killed during the Holocaust, most were not born there. And that's why my grandfather was rounded up. My great-grandfather was rounded up because he was not French by birth. And then he was lucky to be saved. So there's definitely, because I studied Holocaust history as an undergraduate, I wrote a thesis on Holocaust history as an undergraduate, there's a lot of, I'm a naturally empathetic person, but when you're burying yourself in Holocaust history, you're imagining a lot of trauma and you're reading a lot of really scary things that human beings did to one another and what they endured. And I think it's possible to experience a lot of pain in studying a really dark part of history. And that I certainly carry with me. But I think I carry that with me more because I chose to pursue this as an academic discipline. And my family told more of a story of gratitude, of surviving, and of what this country afforded my family. So there was like a great sense of relief in what America made possible for my family, rather than trauma being kind of the principal tale that we told. So that's kind of how I would say that I relate to it.
You are on the board of American Friends of the Parent Circle Family Forum, a joint Israeli-Palestinian organization. Can you tell me a little bit about what the organization does and how you got involved?
Sure. So this is an organization that works with Israelis and Palestinians who have experienced the death of family members relating to the conflict somehow. So it doesn't have to be in war. It can just be that in some kind of act of violence that had anything to do with the ongoing conflict, that a death of a loved one took place. And so that could be an inability to get medical care for someone because they couldn't cross a border. It could be someone who was in a car that blew up because somebody threw a firebomb. And it could be anything in between. And a lot of people have lost loved ones in this conflict on both sides. And because that price is impossible, though that particular group of people on both sides understand something about what this conflict costs, and they can relate to one another, and they can actually find comfort in one another, in building relationships, and in kind of grieving together and walking this walk, because losing a child, losing a parent, losing a loved one is a kind of burden that somebody who hasn't experienced that may not be able to relate to. And so it's an organization that really serves to offer services of being able to offer counseling, being able to offer art therapy, being able to offer dialoguing opportunities. And one of the most important things it does is it actually, until recently, would bring both Palestinians and Israelis who have survived these kinds of tragedies into the school system in Israel. And very often, these were the first Palestinians that Israeli students ever had an opportunity to meet. And so it's such an important organization because the driving ethos of the organization is to show up to provide support for people who are grieving and who will be grieving their entire lives. And to say that the grief is the thing that actually is bringing us together, fueling the hope that we can find some kind of resolution and find some pathway forward toward peace for both of these people. And the relationships between these grief-stricken human beings are very tight and very strong. And many of them have used this opportunity to be able to seek light and seek hope. So that's really what the organization does, is it really just tries to provide support for grief-stricken people and hopefully to bring them together and to allow their stories to illuminate a little bit more of the human facet and the human cost of the conflict. And the reason I got involved was because they came and they did a program here where we heard from an Israeli and a Palestinian And it was a very powerful program. It was one of the only programs I'd ever attended about the ongoing conflict between Palestinians and Israelis that offered me any hope, because these people came as brothers, really brothers.
That's beautiful.
And so I just had a very illuminating experience and kind of went about my life. And then the director, Shiri Orion, who does incredible work, reached out to me a few months later and had a bunch of questions about how to navigate the American Jewish landscape and getting into more synagogues. And I obviously had a lot of opinions and a lot. And she said, wow, like you would be like helpful. Do you want to join our board? I feel like you could be helpful with us figuring out how we spread our the work of this organization across the United States of America. So the American Friends is really a fundraising organization that supports the work of this organization, and we're really just there to help raise awareness about their work and to help bring comfort to these grieving families.
So your father-in-law is also a rabbi,
albeit
from a very different landscape, as you mentioned. Do you guys ever talk shop, or do you ever ask any advice or anything like that?
Absolutely. Not only my father-in-law, but my uncle-in-law, his brother. Oh. So he
a lot of rabbis in the family.
A lot of rabbis in the family I married into. So my father-in-law, Rabbi Larry Karol, served. He started his career in, Dad, don't get mad at me. I know it's a Midwestern city, and he was an associate rabbi at a large Midwestern synagogue. And then he was the solo rabbi of Topeka, Kansas for over 20 years. Then he was in Dover for a little while in New Hampshire, and he concluded his career in Las Cruces, New Mexico. So he is brilliant, and he's also a musical rabbi. So he really has just a very different perspective on American Judaism than I did, first of all, because he was solo. So he was the only call you could make in town. And as a result of that, because he was in smaller communities, the day-to-day work of managing the congregation wasn't necessarily as intense as a congregation of 5,000 people like we have here. But he then needed to be the mouthpiece for Judaism in the city that he lived. So he did a tremendous amount of organizing work and interfaith work. And he was really critical in a lot of the work they did in Topeka, Kansas to memorialize the Holocaust. He was also involved with the Brown v. Board of Education, creating that memorial space. And I think he served on the board of that. And he was just a person who his entire life, well beyond the synagogue, was really to representing Judaism in Topeka, which is the capital of Kansas, and had a fascinating career. But the amazing thing is that if you have a congregation of 100 families like he did, or 1,800 families like we do, the problems that people have and the challenges that they have are not different. And so he's a great person to process with and to talk about just navigating the day-to-day challenges of the rabbinate, or how it is that we talk about a difficult topic from the Bima, or just he knows everybody because he's been around for so long, and he was a real convention goer. So he knows every single rabbi. And so it's always interesting when I meet somebody new and he can say, oh, yes, I studied with them at such and such a convention in such and such a year. He has an amazing memory. So yes, we talk shop all the time. He's incredibly wise. He has a lot of skills that I don't have, like musically. He's a guitar player and he composes music. And my husband is also very musical.
Oh.
Because he's now retired, he has this perspective and this equanimity about the work that I, as a person deeply embedded in it, cannot always harness and muster. And so he's a good check against some of my passions.
So talking about knowing all the rabbis, do you ever interact with clergy of different sects, or is it mostly with Reform rabbis?
So I am part of an alumni network from a fellowship I did during rabbinical school called the Wexner Fellowship, which recently actually changed how it's structured. But when I was doing it for about, I think it had 33 years worth of classes where they brought together rabbinical students, PhD students, and people doing kind of nonprofit work from all of the different sects of Judaism in order to kind of really foster community across all the different work that we were doing, to break down some of those barriers and to be able to kind of think about Jewish leadership in America writ large. We're only one of the programs that they do. They also did something for a lot of Israeli leaderships in government. They also do something for lay leaders who are older and who are leading in their communities, and a lot of them who are doing philanthropic work. So I was just one of these many Wexner programs, but that means that I was with, rabbis who are studying at Yeshiva University and Yeshivat Chovevei Torah, Jewish Theological Seminary, Reconstructionist, all of the different seminaries, and then people who were going into scholarship who were definitely from different denominations of Judaism, but were pursuing secular degrees in academia or in nonprofit leadership. That's the main part of my life where I'm interacting with people from different facets of Judaism, and some of my closest relationships with Orthodox Jews come out of that fellowship. It's a little bit harder, I would say, to on the day-to-day be interacting with other people from different denominations. But I would say in a moment like this, where Israel's under attack and we're all trying as an Upper West Side community to respond, there's definitely a lot of collaboration across synagogues. So we had a vigil on October 10th, but on October 9th, our senior clergy, Rabbi Spratt and Cantor DeLoe, were at Anshe Chesed, which is a conservative synagogue, and they were representing our community there. So in times of distress, there's a lot of those kind of barriers break down, and there's a lot more collaboration, of course. But then also there are fellowships and learning opportunities where you can opt into more diverse communities of Jews, but I wouldn't say on the day-to-day at all. On the day-to-day, my work is so focused on just this single community and all of the people inside of it. So it's certainly not a daily interaction, but I would hope in a year that I would have a few points of contact or a few points of learning with people from beyond the Reform movement, but it's not the easiest thing.
Do you feel like you have to show up or present yourself in a different way as a woman who is a rabbi as opposed to a man?
I think it's important to show up as me. And I have certain ideas about being a rabbi and wanting how people interact with me to be about interacting with me as rabbi, not necessarily me as woman. However, part of the kind of ethos of my rabbinate is warmth. And I think it's a feminine warmth because I'm a mother and because I'm very friendly. And so I'm just very comfortable with the fact that I'm a woman doing this work. And I try to dress modestly in my work because I don't really want my clothes to be the conversation. I want like my rabbinate to be the conversation. I want the experience of the person I'm with to be the conversation. So I think I make certain decisions about how I move through my work in order to make sure that the focus is always on people and on the rabbi-congregant relationship. But I really celebrate that I get to do this work in my body and as a woman, and the way that being a woman helps me add strength to this work. And I think the most explicit way that I do that is I make text study sheets all the time to teach. And my goal is to never have less than 50% of who's represented on that sheet be either women or non-binary people. So that's like my little private way of making sure that more voices are heard. And I think I've made that choice as a woman. But I just feel great joy and privilege that I was born in a time where I get to do this work as me. And I think it's just really fun to be able to every day expand the idea of what a rabbi is because I'm doing it as me, as opposed to doing it the way that it was done for the many, many thousands of years before women could be ordained.
So you and your husband have 2 small children. How has becoming a mother changed your relationship with Judaism and even as a rabbi? I know that when I became a mother, I feel like my relationship with Judaism changed completely. I became more observant. I'm obviously more involved with a congregation. Was that the case for you?
I was already in rabbinical school when I became a mom. I had my son when I was in the summer between my 4th and my 5th years of rabbinical school. So I don't think it changed my relationship to Judaism in terms of my level of observance or in terms of my understanding, but it certainly expanded my relationship to Judaism because all of a sudden I got to live Judaism through the eyes of my children. And so I signed up for PJ Library and started being able to—
We love PJ Library. For those of you that don't know PJ Library, they send free books basically every month if you sign up, and they're about Jewish holidays and things like fall, and they're great. It's a great resource if you like to read with your kids.
And they're developmentally appropriate.
Yes.
So you get the board books for your babies, and then you get more advanced, lift the flat books. And so that was really a joy for me to start seeing all the ways in which we do spend a lot of effort on this Jewishly to try and inspire a love and a joy in Judaism for children. And so that means music, and that means play, and that means holidays, and it means art projects. And being able to be in charge intentionally about my child's Jewish education was such a joy. I mean, the creativity that exists in the Jewish world around bringing children up in a Jewish community is unparalleled. The ways in which we are able to teach them about communal joy, about what it means to have a synagogue place where you go there and the second you walk in, you can be silly and you can move around with your body, which is not always easy in an apartment on the Upper East or West Side, that it can be this big space where you run around and feel safe and get to make art and sing and eat pizza and find joy and find your people. To me, that was like one of the discoveries of parenting in Judaism that I couldn't have anticipated. I already knew intellectually all the things I loved about Judaism and when I wanted to be a rabbi, but being able to be a beneficiary of all the work I was doing to be a parent and also be a rabbi So to feel a little bit of what we're trying to give to all of those people who come into our doors, that was the expansion, was that I get to now be two things in this building, both parent and rabbi. That is really kind of the change that I experienced.
What does a typical Shabbat look like in your house? I know you're not here every Friday. There's like a rotating cast of favorites. It's always fun to see who's leading Friday night services or Saturday morning services. How does that work if you're not working at your house? What do you guys do?
So just to clarify what the rotating cast is, this community has 4 rabbis, 2 cantors, 1 rabbinic intern, and 1 cantorial intern. And so we don't always have to be on the bima every Erev Shabbat and every Shabbat morning. And so the idea is that we take off a Shabbat every 4 to 6 weeks or so that we can be with our families, which is an immense privilege of being in a large synagogue. My father-in-law didn't have that privilege.
Yeah, growing up, we had a rabbi and a cantor, and they were there for all holidays and everything.
Yeah, that's part of the job, and that's really what you're signing up for. So for me, it's such a privilege that I get to be with my family. What Friday night looks like at our house is that dinner is about 5 o'clock for the kids, 5:15. So, and we let them watch TV when they eat sometimes because we want them to eat. So we will let them have like their first 20-minute show and have eating of their dinner. And then between the first and the second, we'll light candles and we'll say the blessings over the wine and we'll say the blessing over the challah. And then we'll say the blessing over our children, which is called Birkat Kohanim, which is the priestly blessing that we offer our children on Shabbat. And if I'm not home on Friday nights, my husband does it for them without me, but he always will save it for bedtime in the hope that I might get home from services in time to be able to give them their blessing. And that's what it looks like. We eat some challah, and then I'm probably in sweatpants because I don't have to work. And there's a lot of snuggling.
Casual Shabbat, yeah.
Exactly, casual Shabbat. There's a lot of snuggling, and we sit on the couch and we read, and we just end the week together. It's not at all a hoopla, but because of the week being an intense week, I wouldn't say that we spend Shabbat with anybody else if I'm not working. I don't have a habit of going to other people's homes or even welcoming people to my home on the Shabbat that I'm not working, because that's actually the time where I get to unwind and have one-on-one time with my family, which is actually kind of hard to come by because the kids are getting bigger and they have crazy schedules. So it becomes really sacred time for us to just be a foursome, just my husband, my children, and me, and to just be. And the blessings are a part of that help us transition. We often actually Zoom my husband's parents, and we do the blessings with them. They live in Kansas City now. So we'll all do the blessings together. And we'll probably talk to them on Zoom. The kids will talk to them for 10 minutes or so, and which basically means my son taking screenshots of them 1,000 times on the iPad while we tell him not to. And then we let them go, and they get to have a second episode, and we talk to my in-laws. And I would say that's kind of a typical if I'm not working Friday night.
What do you think some of the challenges of raising children in New York City are? I feel like it is I grew up in very suburban Los Angeles. So it's been very interesting trying to raise a child here. What are some of the challenges that you find?
The biggest challenge I notice is that there's no backyard. That's for me the biggest issue is, my children, the intention around play has to be there has to be so much greater intention around how kids' free time and playtime is scheduled. We're very lucky in that the boy across the hall from us is in between my children's age. So there is one relationship in their life where somebody can run over and knock on the door. And that is actually, this is the first apartment we've ever had that in. Most apartments, people don't talk to their neighbors. Sorry, it's true. New Yorkers are very nice and they're very helpful, but they're not always the most neighborly with their actual neighbors. But we have a neighborly relationship in our current living setup, which is wonderful. And so our kids will have a little bit of like that, after bath time, playing for 20 minutes at the neighbor's house, or he'll come to our house. But on a weekend, I'm working on Saturdays. I'm often officiating B'nai Mitzvah or leading worship. And so my husband is 1-on-2. So everything just has to be so much more scheduled. And I didn't grow up being that scheduled.
Yeah.
I remember being on a soccer team when I was in 3rd grade. My older son is 1st. So we're talking about 2 more years, and he's not showing himself to be such an athlete. Be prepared. I'm going to be pushing him toward the theater world. You guys can handle him.
Yeah, he can send him our way.
Yeah, he'll be a tour guide. It's just really difficult to kind of think about outside. Right now, the biggest thing that kind of stresses me out is that I don't know how to teach my son how to ride a bike because I don't know where to go.
Yeah, it's crazy. And where do you keep the bike?
We are lucky. We have a bike room.
You're very lucky.
But we don't have a bike yet. But when we do have a bike, we will have a bike room. So right now our plan is we're going to commit to some point where over like a 4 to 6 week period, we're going to drive to Scarsdale to my grandma's house where she has a long driveway. And we're going to spend like an hour over like 4 to 5 weeks with my son in the driveway because we don't know where to go in New York City. But isn't that crazy that we had to have to drive 45 minutes to learn the whole point of a bike to not use a car? It's just so silly. But we don't really know what else to do. So it's hard. The kind of outside free time part, I think, of raising a kid in the city is difficult. But one of the amazing assets, I think, of raising a kid in the city is that on a rainy day, we go to the Met. We go to the American Museum of Natural History. My kids have school friends. They have playground friends. They have dance friends. They have theater friends. Like, there's a different group of friends for every single activity that they're interested in. And because they go to this school, the Road of Shalom School, which is a Reform Jewish day school, they get a lot of the diversity in their friendships in the other parts of the world we take them to. Whereas when I was growing up, my synagogue friends, my after-school friends, my school friends were all the same people. We were all just in the same town. And I had my summer camp friends who, shock of shocks, were very similar to my school friends. So I didn't get that kind of diversity. So I think the assets of raising a kid here far outweigh the difficulties. But I think from a parenting perspective of young children, not being able to say, like, run to the neighbor's backyard and play there for a few hours, that's hard. That's really hard.
Everything is very scheduled. I feel like I'll pick my daughter up from school and I'm like, okay, we're going to do this. And then we're going to go to the park. And then we're going to it's very scheduled. And the classes in this neighborhood are a whole, I feel like I need an episode just on the classes of the Upper West Side and that being a full-time job.
Like freshman year, trying to figure out like which ones you're going to get into.
Yeah,
exactly.
And it adds up. It's so expensive.
True.
So you talked about rabbinical internship. You interned here.
I did.
You're now a rabbi here. For most people, I'm assuming this is not the case, that they're, ending up at a synagogue close to where they're from. Is it just kind of, what is the process of once you're ordained or you're at the process of becoming an intern? How does that work? Do you apply different synagogues? You get choice? Or is it just kind of like, well, wherever you end up, you end up? I feel like it's kind of like maybe being a doctor when you're, finished with your residency.
It used to be. So it used to be like that. It actually changed after I was ordained. So we used to have like a matching process, which
cool.
I avoided because I was offered a job here while I was still an intern. So that meant that I didn't have to go into placement. And placement is what happens at the end of your 5th year when you go and you try to get a job. You write a vision statement. A lot of people create websites. They put their resume together and then they put everything out there. During COVID, all of the interviews were on Zoom. But in an ideal world, you might have a first round interview on Zoom. And then if they want to learn more from you, they fly you or they bring you out to the community. You get to, meet the leadership. You maybe give a sermon. You maybe teach a class. And they really get to meet you and host you. Now, the placement process is no longer – it used to be that the 5th years basically had this special time where all of the communities that were willing to hire an assistant rabbi who had an opening, they flew to one of the 3 campuses and they did the first round of interviews in person. And so they flew all the students who were not at that campus in. And so for 3 days, you just had interviews. And then from there on, it was who's going to do a site visit and where are you going to go? And then there was match day where you couldn't communicate. And then on that day, you would wait for the call. But of course, that's a very imperfect system because people don't want to miss out on their first choice. But sometimes some of the congregations would get stressed. And so they would worry that maybe their first choice wasn't going to go for them because it's like dating. It's like you don't know. And it was a very stressful process. So they tried to change it a few times and ultimately they did away with the system. So now people apply to jobs and they're competing with every other rabbi that's out there. It's still a real privilege in the hiring pool to be an assistant because if you're looking to hire an assistant, you're still looking for a new graduate. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but the main one being that they're looking to shape and raise up a new rabbi. And if you have somebody who's 5 or 10 years into their career, of course they're still being shaped, but they are who they are. They come with their skills and they come with their preferences for the work that they're looking to do and how they're looking to make their mark on a community. Whereas somebody who's new in the field kind of comes just ready and hungry to work. That's certainly how I was. And that's a profile that a lot of communities are looking for when they're trying to hire for an assistant. So it's not like it's the privileges of being newly ordained are completely eliminated, but you don't have this structured process that's kind of where you walk through every step and it's really legislated by the seminary in partnership with the CCAR, which is the union for all of the rabbis. Now it's basically you apply for jobs and you see what happens.
That sounds very stressful. I feel like
Yes.
there are a lot more incoming rabbis than retiring rabbis or moving rabbis or things like that.
They do study this. The CCAR commission studies to kind of understand the movement that is happening. But what's interesting is that there are more than just those jobs. So somebody might be leaving a job in a synagogue, but taking a job in a nonprofit. Or somebody might be leaving a job in a nonprofit and now taking a job in a synagogue. So that means one less job in a synagogue for a newly ordained person. So all of that movement means that it's kind of unpredictable. But I think because the numbers that the seminary have been graduating recently, I think are maybe holding a bit steady. What I have heard is that there are enough jobs for graduates.
Oh, that's
which is
great.
a good thing.
That's
which is
great.
a good thing if the market is saying we have jobs for you, which wasn't the case, let's say like in 2009 with the financial crash.
Yeah.
That year there were very few jobs and a lot of people had to figure out what they were going to do in the interim. That's not the case now. I'm pretty sure what's happening now is that people are being ordained and they're finding work, which is wonderful.
This is the only synagogue you've worked at. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. Well, officially, yes, but I did a fabulous summer shadowing internship when I was going into my 4th year of rabbinical school at BJBE congregation outside of Chicago, which is actually the congregation of our wonderful Rabbi Deborah Goldberg. And I worked with Rabbi Karen Kadar, who is one of the first female ordained rabbis in the country. She was among the first 50, and she was an incredible teacher. And I shadowed her for 2 months over a summer and learned a tremendous amount from seeing her community. She actually led an entire building project of their synagogue. And so their whole synagogue building tells a story. And just understanding how her mission and vision drove her rabbinate, the amount of learning I did with her in those, 6 to 8 weeks were pretty transformative for me as a rabbi. So even though I wasn't really on their payroll, it was definitely certainly like on the map of my life, a community that I count. So I will say that Chicago community did teach me a lot. And I worked very briefly at Temple Shari Tefillah on the east side as a religious school teacher. So I guess I have that too. But those are the only places.
What made you decide to stay after you were an intern?
I decided to stay while I was an intern. I went to Rabbi Levine, our senior rabbi emeritus, in maybe the November of my 4th year, which was I'd only been on the job for 16 months. And I said, I will do anything to stay here because this community is so engaged and so rigorous in its Jewish commitment. It's so Jewishly literate. It's so New York, and I am so New York, and I love this building, and I love this people, and what I really, really admired was that the clergy in this community care so much about being clergy to their flock, that this is a very inward-facing clergy team, and I got into this work because I wanted to serve a single community. I'm a very monogamous rabbi. I really wanted to form a covenantal relationship with a single community and to just be there and walk with them. And that was the incredible example that I saw from Rabbi Levine and Rabbi Spratt and Rabbi Weitzman, who's now a senior up in Albany, and Rabbi Laufer, who's now in Los Angeles, who is my mentor. They were all so focused on service to this place and to these people. And the derech eretz, the honor that this community gave to their clergy, including the cantors and the collaboration between the cantors and the rabbis, was just so incredible and so admirable and so unlike anything I'd seen before that I just thought, if I could stay here forever, I should probably tell him. And I'd fallen in love with this place and I didn't want to leave.
What advice do you have to somebody who is interested in becoming a rabbi?
That's such a good question. I think the advice that I have to a person interested in the rabbinate is first to spend a lot of time in a synagogue community and to start understanding that interest. What is it that you're passionate about in Judaism? What's driving you? Is it that you love worship? Is it that you love study? Is it that you love volunteering and doing acts of tikkun olam? I think spending a lot of time in a synagogue so that you understand the kind of circadian rhythms of Jewish life is hugely important because, as I said at the beginning of the interview, this is a big responsibility. And one of the things a person has to assess is, am I up for this responsibility? And there's no judgment against anybody who decides, oh, I'll be a lay leader. I'll serve on the board of trustees. I'll lead a committee. I'll bring my Torah of theater and tour guiding and podcasting to this community, and I'll help in all of the ways that I know how. There are so many ways to contribute to Jewish community beyond being a clergy person. So it's important to spend a lot of time in a synagogue to really assess, is that the role in Jewish life that's calling to you? And if that is, then go for it. Apply to rabbinical school. Write a vision statement. Think about what it is that you can do to add strength to Am Yisrael and to bring light to the world. I mean, that's what this job is really existing to do, is to bring strength so that we can, move the door vador from one generation to the next and keep the flame of Jewish tradition alive. If being a rabbi is the way, after spending time in a synagogue context, that a person feels that they can do that, then I think there's, nothing should get in their way. But I also would really celebrate a person discovering all of the myriad Jewish opportunities for Jewish leadership that exist in the Jewish world, and asking themselves, are there other ways to contribute Jewishly? Because we would be telling the wrong story if all we said was the only way to be a leader in Judaism is to be a rabbi or to be a cantor. You can be a teacher. You can be a member of a board of trustees. You can you can volunteer with any number of fabulous nonprofit organizations. You can lobby with the RAC. You can go call your legislators. I mean, you can help philanthropically. There are just so many ways to lead Jewishly. And so anybody who's thinking about being a rabbi, I would just say, I would invite you to think about Jewish leadership writ large, and then kind of discern, is the rabbinate the path for you? And if so, go. Chazak va'amatz, have strength and have courage. But if you discern along the journey that there are other ways that call to you, that's also so beautiful and so holy. And we need you, this person that we're talking to, we need you to do that. So it's all so critical.
So this next section is kind of stolen from the Actors Studio. They're just short form questions and answers. So what is your favorite Yiddish word? I'll say even Hebrew word, because I know you have extensive knowledge of Hebrew.
I already came up with this because I think this is such a good question. Yenevelt. Yenevelt means far away. And my parents would say, I grew up in Scarsdale, which has 5 elementary school districts, and I lived in Green Acres and Quaker Ridge. If I wanted a play date in Quaker Ridge, my parents would say, that's Yenevelt. I don't want to drive over there. It literally translates to other world.
Oh.
Yenevelt is my favorite because it was always this I have to drive 15 minutes. It's Yenevelt.
I will be using that when I talk about commutes now. That is, I love Yiddish because even if people don't know what the word means, just the saying of the word, it's very you feel it in your body.
Oh yeah, it's frustrated. Yenevelt.
What's your favorite Jewish holiday?
What is my favorite Jewish holiday? Where do I get so much joy? I think Sukkot is my favorite Jewish holiday because it's the relief of being done with the high holidays. And it wasn't Sukkot growing up. It was obviously Hanukkah growing up because I wanted to get presents. But now it's Sukkot because there is the kind of joy is like the joy of running the marathon and finishing, and that French fry you eat afterward of I'm done and I get to eat whatever I want because I've been running for 40 years and now I'm done and I have my medal and I have my aluminum cape and I am a superhero. Building that sukkah is our superhero move. We're we have gotten through another high holidays. We have done this crazy marathon of, it's not just Rosh Hashanah, then it's 10 days, and then it's Yom Kippur, which is Rosh Hashanah with fasting and solemnity. So it is a way to start the year. And so Sukkot is this kind of silliness almost in the relief that you've made it through. But what I love so much about the Jewish calendrical year is we do our Super Bowl at the beginning of the season, not at the end. So that's the permission that I need to rabbi for the rest of the year. If I can get through the high holidays and have people feel like we brought meaning to their lives and help them kind of change the page into that next chapter, and they felt that was ritually authentic for them, then by the time Sukkot comes around, I'm shaking that lulav and I am just living my best life. So I don't think any other moment in the year kind of compares with the relief of Sukkot. And Sukkot also encompasses Simchat Torah and unfurling the Torah and dancing with the Torah and starting over from Deuteronomy to Genesis. Just all of that encapsulates this kind of unfettered joy that comes both with just Jewish joy and really taking pride in our traditions and in the beautiful symbolism and choreography of what we do and why we do it. But because of where it comes, it's the relief that makes it stand out.
I always wanted to have a sukkah in the backyard, but it was one of those things I think I never said that I wanted. And now I live in New York City. So I don't think that's ever going to happen. I know.
Our sukkah is your sukkah.
If you were to have a bat mitzvah today, what would the theme of the party be?
That is such a good question. I actually think I wouldn't do a theme.
Theme?
I think because I'm a rabbi, I have to say like the theme would be the bat mitzvah. So I would love to say that there would be a theme, but I would actually just be more concerned with the music. I would have like a very intense techno dance playlist that would be like aggressive and amazing.
I love that. What profession other than your own would you want to attempt?
There's a couple, but I would love to be a children's book author, which is what my dad did. I have a very whimsical mind, and I think having children has made me take that whimsy much more seriously. So I would love to do that. I also think being a children's librarian would be an amazing job. And I think about this all the time. One of my, intellectual passions is reading books by food writers. Mm-hmm. And in another life, I wish I were confident in the kitchen because I'm fascinated by food and chefs and restaurant culture and all of that. I certainly am not tough enough to be working in a restaurant. That is not how I'm wired. But that whole world is so kind of inspiring to me, and the magic that happens in a kitchen and the collaboration that happens and the transformation of ingredients into food is super fascinating. So that's not like if I wasn't a rabbi, it's more if I was a different person. But I'll answer that question too.
If heaven is real and God is there to welcome you, what would you like to hear them say?
Your life mattered.
I'm going to cry. I feel like that's all anybody really wants. I love that. I love how simplistic and beautiful that is. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you for having me.
So for those of you interested in checking out Road of Shalom, it is on 83rd and Central Park West in the Upper West Side. You can visit the website, and the clergy here is fantastic. So anyone who's in the area and looking to check out some services or find a new home, I definitely recommend coming and checking it out. Thank you so much. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode. I know I enjoyed recording it and talking to Rabbi Juli. This is Nicole Kelly, and this has been She Brew in the City.